food. It's magnificent. But the people that did this, if you quiz them, they will tell you that they're trusting God and they're using their talents. And that helps me enormously. Does that make sense to you? Probably doesn't answer your question, but it's interesting anyway.
How do you guys see critical theory affecting the academy?
Well, I can say immediately I can't answer the question because I'm not affiliated with the secular academy. I've only taught at Talbot School of Theology or Trinity Evangelical Divinity School or Houston Christian. And even that has been part-time. So I just have no firsthand experience with this.
Okay. So the question was, how does critical theory affect teaching in the academy?
It's terrifying, particularly in this country. Yes. And I haven't made a close study of it in North America, but I've met enough professors in secular universities who are really running scared, because the idea of a university where you can discuss and present ideas that are controversial is being stifled by all aspects of that. Starts with political correctness, and it's getting worse and worse. The statement 3 days ago in California, I don't know whether you read it, all professors are going to have to comply with a very prescriptive way of dealing with issues, particularly concerning race, and it's going to put them in an absolute straitjacket. Now, I'm very pleased that the head of my University of Oxford has taken a very strong stand against the students that say we need a safe space. We don't want to have these people. We're going to deplatform them. My view is that if they think like that, they should stay at home with their mummies and daddies and suck their thumbs and change their diapers a bit more often. Right. But it is tragic when this kind of thing becomes normative academic behaviour. Now, I see it filtering into the UK institutions, and I suspect, I hope I'm wrong, that within relatively few years, people like me won't be able to exist, because we'll have to sign certain declarations of agreement to ideas, particularly moral and ethical ideas, that redefine fundamental things in society, like the family, like marriage, and all this kind of thing. And we'll not be able to avoid it, and we'll be out. That seems to me to be coming, and you're very right to be concerned about it. And I'm delighted to hear that from a pastor of a church, actually, because it seems to me that one of the things that is hugely important these days, that, if I might say so, Pastor, that pastors of churches, either themselves or using people in their congregations that interact with this kind of thing, prepare young people for an absolute avalanche of undermining the Christian worldview. We are in a battle of worldviews, there's no question about it. And although Bill says, very modestly, that he doesn't work in that context, I want to tell you that the kind of stuff he produces philosophically is an immense help to those who do. So thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Yes. You know, I'm almost scared to answer, which is telling in itself.
That's the answer.
Yeah, that's the answer in itself. I cannot teach like I used to teach. I can't tell jokes. I used to tell jokes and make the class laugh.
Yes.
And now if I tell jokes, I get some notice that a student was offended by this, and they've gone to the dean of students. And I'm just trying to think, what on earth did I say? So I've become far more stoic in my presentations. I think it's affected my teaching. I have so many things that I want to get done in my research and in reflecting who God is in my life. I don't want that to be cut off because of a couple of little statements that I've made. And so I retract from so many things because of that. And so I think it's damaged the university, and it's also damaged the students. You learned to teach a long time ago. And you know, this is my 35th year of being a professor, so I've been teaching a long time. And students just cannot handle what they used to handle. I mean, students didn't walk away and feel offended at every little comment. And now every little thing they're offended, and even things that I thought would encourage them has gotten somebody offended to the point where they go and lodge a complaint. When I think of the things that professors said to me, I'm colorblind, and I was in analytical chemistry, and I asked a professor, can I have the person standing next to me just tell me when the color changes in this titration? I can't tell the color change, and I'll do all the work. He'll just say color change there, and I know to stop. He said, you have a defect, and you're going to have to learn to live with that defect. And I wasn't offended.
He would have been jailed.
And what I did is I learned how to do it potentiometrically, meaning electronically. And I used an electrode, and I wrote a program to figure this thing out. And to this day, I use what I learned in that little event to help me in my science, to figure out how to do things. And so these things are challenges to us, and challenge students. And you can't challenge a student anymore because they'll be offended. So that's how it's affected me in my own career. So to me, this is not a philosophical thing. This is real nuts and bolts of what I do.
I had a leading mathematician from a very famous university in my country. And I hadn't met him before, and we were just sitting chatting, and he suddenly burst into tears. International reputation. I said, what's wrong? He said, they've silenced me. I said, who? Who? He said, my colleagues have silenced me. And I daren't mention the name of God or the name of Christ. Now, what you were saying and what you were saying, Jim, is that people are now being taught to play the victim role. We've developed this awful victim culture. And I'm offended, I'm hurt, you've offended me, you've upset me. And there's a real job here, I think, again, pastorally, for people who teach scripture and all the rest of it, to try and shift that. Because it is a very unhealthy thing, not only from a philosophical or psychological perspective, but from a Christian perspective. If anything, the gospel should lift us right out of that. Christ has been the victim to save us from this kind of culture. But you're hitting on a very deep and serious thing, and we need to pray for each other and help each other, because there needs to be, let me put it this way, a forum in churches where hurting people can talk about their experiences of everyday life. I'm very concerned about this, and I've just written a book about it. Now, I don't know you all, so I can speak freely. I'm desperately concerned that many churches in our country have nothing to say about the workplace, the scientist working in the lab, the philosopher working in the academy. They give a message that has a moral dimension and a spiritual dimension. But to the school teacher who's spending 5 days a week teaching kids, she might be encouraged to teach a Sunday school class, but nobody talks to her about all the problems in the workspace. And that's why I wrote a book about work just a few months ago, to try and get people to think that God is interested in our work 24/7. And Scripture says, all that you do, not all the Christian things you do, all that you do unto the Lord. And that's exciting. I know Jim's passionate about what happens to chemistry when you do it for the Lord.
Oh, I love it. I love it. It is so much fun. I go to my office and I love doing my work, and I feel that Jesus is just blessing my work, and he blesses me, and it's exciting to walk with the Lord. I can't imagine going to my office and not knowing that God is for me and doing these things. So yeah, I love it, and this is why I go to work to have fun.
I started by thanking you all for what you do. We have watched so many of your videos all the way from South Africa to here. It's been influential in our lives and in families' lives. So thank you to both of you. And this is more a personal question. We've watched so many debates, and I've literally stood up and switched off the TV because I got so upset with the people who are debating. How can I not understand? You hear the same questions over and over. You treat each person with respect every single time. Answer their questions so calm. How do you do it? And how do you just keep so calm?
Who are you looking at?
He's not looking at me, I'll tell you that.
He's not looking at Jim. Are you even this part of the table?
How do you remain calm in a debate situation when the opponent is insulting and derogatory and vile in his behavior? And I think there are a couple of things that have helped me. One is that Jesus says that rejoice and be glad when men revile you and persecute you and say all manner of things falsely about you for my name's sake. Rejoice and be glad, because your reward is great in heaven. And so when I hear this sort of opprobrium and insult from the other side, I think in my mind, thank you for putting another reward for me in heaven. He's just given me a great gift. And that helps you, I think, to turn the other cheek and not get upset with it. But then as well, I have to say, part of my debate training in high school and college was to have a poker face during debate. You are not to react in any way to what the opponent says. You are to remain calm and not get upset. And so that training has served me well in dealing with audiences and opponents that can often stoop to these sorts of personal attacks.
Most people are intelligent enough to see when an opponent who behaves like that is losing the plot. And I feel it's hugely important. My motivation is I'm going to do my best in this hostile situation to befriend the person. Not simply answer the questions, but befriend them, show them some kind of friendship. And it's not easy with Richard Dawkins and some of the others. But the point is that attitude that Bill has described, that often leads to conversion. I did my debate with Dawkins, the big one in Alabama, 14 years ago, something like that. I still hear from people who got converted watching it. And when they tell me what it wasn't altogether what I said. It was the fact that you treated him with respect, even though when his arguments were so vicious, that people see. And I really do believe that if we don't like the heat, we need to stay out of the kitchen. That's the first thing. But secondly, the world watches attitude just as much as it watches content. And that's hugely important. I'll tell you a story of one debate I did in Australia. And I went on a TV program that's watched by a massive percentage of the Australian population. It's called the IQ2 or something. And I was warned, first of all, that I was one of the only Christians that had ever been invited on it. And I was told in no uncertain terms and sent a video to indicate that they would tear me to pieces. And I thought, well, this is a delightful invitation. And I went on, I was terrified, you see. And we met in a green room beforehand. And there was, I think she was a sociologist. She wouldn't shake hands with me. Made it absolutely clear she would have nothing to do with me. So the debate starts, there are 5 or 6 on it. And unfortunately, one of the participants was a comedian who was absolutely pathetic. And the moderator allowed him far too much rope. But anyway, this lady didn't look at me. And of course, we only got a little saying something. So she suddenly said something. And it came to me. And I said, I think we need to listen to this lady very carefully. Because actually what she's saying is extremely important. And she just turned completely, visibly on TV. I had a phone call from a leading Australian evangelical who said, I've never seen that happen on TV before. She just lit up and she said the following. She said, and of course there's Richard Dawkins, isn't there? And he talks absolute rubbish because, and she was an atheist. She said, because he doesn't see that what he believes is a belief system. And she was as friendly with me afterwards as she could possibly have been. And that is what happens. I did another debate with a very leading expert on euthanasia in this country who had to turn off the switch on her husband. You probably know her, in Utah. She writes a leading book. And 2 months before our debate, she had gone against all her principles for assisted dying to turn off the switch for her husband who'd been injured in a cycle accident. And I was told this, and I said, does she still want to debate? And the answer came back, yes. And I said, well, look, I will only debate if I can have a meal with her beforehand. So I went and I sat with her and I said, look, I know what's been happening to you. Do you really want to go through with this? Because it was a debate on suffering. Mm. And she says, I do. Well, I said, look, everybody in the room is going to know your story. Would you mind if I mention it? She said, would you? Now, she's an atheist. Would you? I said, I'd be honored to, but are you really sure? So at the beginning, I stood up. I asked to make an extra statement. I stood up and I said, now, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to listen to this lady very carefully because she's been through a horrific experience of life. And what she says will be deeply affected by it. And I want you to show respect, no criticism, listen to the argument. Afterwards, she came up and she threw her arms around me in public. Oh. And she called the photographer over and she said, will you please take a photograph? She said, I want my department to see this because they are not going to believe it. That's what I feel can be achieved by attitude. And the Lord helps you to do it. And I had some wonderful times in South Africa as well.
If you do not believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ, send me an email and give me a chance to tell you by Zoom why I believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ.